Welcome back to a brand new video, ladies and gentlemen. What happens if Donald Trump and his illegal, bogus administration and unconstitutional administration violate court orders? Or more specifically, violate the Alien Enemies Act deportation court order? Let's find that out in today's video. This reporting by News Nation. The article is titled, "What Happens If Trump Did Ignore Court Order on Deportation Flights?" And ladies and gentlemen, the article reads, News Nation, President Donald Trump has temporarily prevailed in his battle with a federal judge over the use of an 18th century wartime law to resume deportation flights. But questions remain on whether his deportation violated an original court order stopping the departures, and what happens if they did. The Supreme Court granted the administration's request on Monday to scrap U.S. District Judge James Boasberg's BOASBERG''S order, which had temporarily blocked deportation flights under Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Trump said after the ruling it was a, quote, great day for justice in America, in a Truth Social post. Yeah, but here's the thing, you piece of fucking dog turd shit. They temporarily put a stop to Judge Boasberg's order, you fucking dumb shit. You might be asking yourselves, what exactly and how did they put a temporary stop to Judge Boasberg's order? What do you mean by that? Well, here's what I mean, ladies and gentlemen. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court put an administrative stay, which means that it allows for the Supreme Court to brief a little bit more on the context. That does not mean that the Trump administration won. It just means that the Supreme Court needs to brief a little bit more until there is a ruling from them. So, not necessarily did Trump and his illegal, unlawful administration and illegal and unlawful DOJ and ICE win. They are declaring yet again victory way too early. Like the dumbasses they are. Ladies and gentlemen, continuing with the article. Trump's DHS revokes legal status for migrants who entered the U.S. on Biden-era CPB CBP One app. Boasberg, Boasberg, had been locked in a battle with the Justice Department for weeks over the matter, while the Supreme Court may have settled the use of the law. The issue is far from over. The federal judge still must weigh in on whether the Trump administration failed to return two deportation flights that were in the air when he issued his March 15 ruling telling officials to turn them around. In a hearing last week, Boasberg said there was a fair likelihood the administration violated the order. While not completely unprecedented, the escalating battle showdown could still bring two branches of government to a head. Has the Trump administration defied court orders on deportation flights? No one has the right to defy a court order, not even the president. David Cole, a professor of law at Georgetown University, told News Nation. But Trump nor his administration has, at any point so far, said they have or can ignore court orders, he noted. It remains to be seen whether they defied the court's order, but they are not arguing they have the authority to do so. They are arguing that they did not, he said. That line of defense is used frequently by defendants, including government bodies and officials, Cole added. Washington, D.C., March 27, U.S. President Donald Trump speaks during his White House iftar dinner, March 27, 2025, in Washington, D.C. Iftar is the evening meal that Muslims have after fasting throughout the day during Ramadan, a month-long period of fasting, communal prayer, and reflection in this photo right here. Ladies and gentlemen, just so you all know. The administration had previously argued that the court order had its limits and that there were special circumstances as to why those deportation plans didn't turn back. One of their arguments asserts the state secrets privilege, which allows the government to block the release of information in a lawsuit that could harm national security. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. None of this information that Judge Boasberg is asking for harms national security. These guys in the administration are just flat out lazy and don't want to hand over information that a federal judge is legally asking for by law. Continuing, ladies and gentlemen, with the article. The Justice Department has also said that the judge's verbal directions to halt flights did not count. It argued only his written order needed to be followed and that it couldn't apply to flights that had already left the U.S. Again, ladies and gentlemen, that is a flat-out lie. I will rebuke that right now per constitutional law. Continuing with the article. They're going to try to read orders narrowly and see if they can do things that they believe are outside the order. Every administration does that. Sikaresha Prakasha, a professor at the University of Virginia Law School, said, adding that they are not openly going to say they're going to ignore a court order. But if at any point the administration does say they'll ignore the order, the U.S. would hit a constitutional red line, Cole said. A constitutional democracy rests on the proposition that the political branches are bound by the Constitution, that the courts have the authority to say what the Constitution means, and if you lose before the court, you have to follow the law, he said. Otherwise, he added, you don't have a system of rule of law. Ladies and gentlemen, what happens if a court order is ignored? We're about to find that out. If a defendant does not abide by a court order, the court can hold them in contempt, which may be punishable with fines or jail time. In the case of the executive branch, they would most likely be held under civil contempt versus criminal. Boasberg, Boasberg, has already said he would make a decision as soon as possible on whether to pursue civil contempt proceedings against Trump administration officials for defying his original court order. For contempt proceedings against the federal government, fines may target a non-compliant agency as a whole, or the head of the agency may face personal fines or imprisonment, according to according to the Congressional Research Service. Ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court allows the Trump administration to deport Venezuelans, but only after they have had their day in court. In other words, have had their due process rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution followed. But federal courts are sometimes willing to hold federal agencies and officials in contempt. They rarely impose sanctions or fines or imprisonment due to issues of sovereign immunity, which limits the ability to sue a government without its consent. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is bullshit, because you do not need somebody's consent to sue them under the Constitution. Sovereign governments are considered U.S. citizens as well under the Indian, under one of the Indian amendments that were passed by Congress. So, which means, I said one of the Indian amendments that were passed by Congress, because I can't remember the full name, the entirety of the name, off the top of my head. Hence, typically what I'm saying is that they do not, or that they have to follow the U.S. Constitution, because they are, by the Supreme Court, also considered U.S. citizens. So hence, they have to obey the Constitution no matter what, despite them being a sovereign nation. Even in the cases where a government agency is held in contempt, appellate courts have often halted the proceedings, the report noted. Sean Donahoe, a political science professor at the University at Buffalo, said Trump himself wouldn't be held in contempt, but rather an agency or an official, because a sitting president cannot be prosecuted. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, BOASBERG, Chief Justice of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, stands for portrait at Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse in Washington, D.C. March 16, 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to find out how courts enforce sanctions. Another issue that may complicate the matter is that court sanctions are enforced by the U.S. Marshal Service, which falls under the Department of Justice. This has led to some concern that if the executive branch chose to defy a court order, it might also seek to prevent the U.S. Marshals from enforcing contempt sanctions. Outside of contempt, there is not much more a court can do, Donahoe said. But here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. If the U.S. Marshal Service is ordered by federal courts, including state courts, to do and execute a federal law, they have to obey the courts per federal law 566, which states that they have to, pretty much. To summarize it, that's what federal law 566 states that they have to. Just ask Glenn Kushner, who is a 30-year former federal prosecutor. By the way, shout-outs to him for pointing that out, even though most of us that have brains already knew that. The U.S. Marshal Service does not always have to follow, in this case, the Attorney General's orders. Fuck you, Pam Bondi. You suck. You're a dumbass broad who does not know anything. Continuing with the article, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, Trump administration is currently searching for countries to accept migrants, according to a report. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to find out if courts have held agencies in contempt before. While rare, the type of legal lock between federal courts and agencies is not unprecedented. In 1999, a federal judge held the Secretaries of the Treasury and Interior Departments in contempt of court for repeatedly failing to produce court-ordered records in the largest lawsuit ever brought by Native Americans. The sanction the judge imposed was limited to paying the fees of plaintiffs' attorneys. In 2001, a federal judge held then Interior Secretary Gail A. Norton in contempt after a trial for misleading a judge for filing inaccurate reports regarding money owed to tribes. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the last paragraph to the article, the judge could have also, I will point out, had the then Secretary Gail serve prison time for violating the judge's court order. And I will have you guys note, ladies and gentlemen, that the then Secretary Gale could have also faced charges of falsifying business records. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, but he could have also faced charges under federal law for falsifying business records. Continuing with the last paragraph to the article. A federal judge in Louisiana held the Interior Department in contempt again in 2011 over what he called dismissive conduct by blocking offshore oil drilling after an oil spill. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for today's legal breaking reporting video and analysis video. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. If you want to make sure that you never miss a brand new legal breaking reporting, please consider hitting the bell icon that is right next to the subscribe button below the screen here, directly on the right hand side, and hit the all notifications options instead of the personalized notifications option. That way you make sure you're notified of every single legal breaking reporting video. And another way you guys can also be sure to stay up to date on when I posted a brand new legal breaking reporting is by following me on my social medias that I will have linked down below. I am on Instagram, Snapchat, Threads, as well as TikTok. Until my next legal breaking reporting, ladies and gentlemen, please stay positive, stay safe, look for the points of light in today's corrupt world because of the Trump administration and his illegal DOJ. And I will talk to you guys in the next legal breaking reporting.